Greetings and welcome back to the Home Slice. In this video, I am going to show you some simple and effective techniques to overlay new handles on certain styles of pocket knives. In this video, we will be taking this Victorinox Junior, which is a pretty fun little, medium small blade made by Victorinox, and turning it into a custom molded linen micarta, super thin, slip joint, kind of micro slicer, if you will. So the first thing that you want to do is you want to start dreaming about what do you want the eventual shape of this blade to be, and what do you want the eventual shape of this handle to be. What's cool about it is when you're doing custom work, you can't add material to it, but you can take material off if you're really careful not to affect the lock mechanics or the important functions of the knife. This is a great opportunity actually to create some ergonomics that are actually custom molded to your hand. So what I recommend is kind of using the knife that you're going to customize a couple of times. Get a feel for how you normally grip it, and then take note of where do your fingers fall on that, and where could it be comfortable to have some ergonomics. So on this particular knife, I've decided to do a similar thing to what I did last time. Let's find out where that thumbnail relief is. I'm going to do a similar thing to what I did last time, in that I've really enjoyed turning the drop point into just a slight clip point. I might go a little bit more extreme this time and sort of clip off that point. And then I'd like to, there's enough meat behind the lock that I like to hollow out a little spot here for my thumb to rest in. We're going to expose that copper pivot because I think that looks really pretty. Take off a little bit back here. Alright, once you've drawn up your design and kind of have a rough idea of it, take that page out of your notebook and head up to wherever it is you're going to be working on the knife. It should be noted so that you don't shoot yourself in the foot where important features are, such as this is the source of the lock strength in this knife. So, and you can look through inside and see about how thick it is. So you don't want to take too much material off the back in this knife. I've done it before where I flattened the spine of the knife to the spot where the lock goes, so I know that I can do that, but you want to be careful with that. You also want to be careful with features like there's a sort of pivot bar inside here that the lock rotates on, and then there's the pins that hold your knife together and hold the locking bar in place are located back here. So you can take steel away as long as you don't expose the point when it's closed, as long as that point is still buried. That's why I left a little bit of room there. That'll still be buried. And as long as you've still got enough strength to your pins and pivots. Alright, let's go. In this case, we gotta remove these plastic handles. But in any DIY rehandling project, you're gonna have to figure out how to get the handles off if it didn't come as a blank blade. For these Victorinoxes, I'd recommend just gently sticking them in the vice grip. Get a chisel, pop those little plastic things off. This is what you're left with, and what we're going to do is we're going to grind this one and this one down. We're going to take the two copper kind of rivets here and grind them down a little bit with a flap disc grinder, and then when they get close to the surface of this metal, we're going to carefully peen them out and turn them into rivets that are flush with the top of this. I'm going to leave this one, and then we're going to glue some micarta over this whole surface. It's always a good idea to put some tape over the knife blade so you don't cut yourself. Okay, for this part you want to clamp it gently but securely. You don't want to bend this little metal, but you want to make sure it's not going to go anywhere. We're going to use a flap disc grinder, and you need to get your eye right down where it's level so you can see when you're about to contact this stainless, because you don't really want to grind into this stainless, but you do want to get this pretty flush. We're going to take off a little metal and heat that up, and then hit it with the peening hammer to start expanding it out so that it grips the metal, because we need it to actually cup around this piece of stainless. So, here we go. I've actually taken off too much here and the pin is wanting to fall out, so I got to tap it back through and then just put something solid behind it so that it stays in place. Hold on momentarily. I'm using this peening hammer, and I had to ram a nail into the top of it because I can't find the normal peening hammer. And this one was actually a separate head and handle. So maybe don't try this at home, and do be more careful with that than I just was. But I think we've successfully got that mushroomed out. This will all get covered with micarta, so it's not the biggest deal in the world, but maybe do take it a bit slower than I just did if you want to have optimal results. Peening is not really an exact science, it's just kind of, well, it's probably more of an exact science than the way I approach it, but you basically want to hit the center of the metallic object with the rounded side of the hammer, and if you do, it begins to expand, and the expansion actually reaches out and grabs that metal around it. On these little Victorinoxes, you'll know that you've got down low enough when the little ring of extra copper around the outside pops off. You can see the width of that. Ooh, she's hot. You can see the width of that, and then as I start to peen it and expand it out, that little ring will come off. Oh, there they go. You see you're left with just a very small copper pin. You want to be careful not to over peen these ones on the outside, because if you miss, I guess, what you really got to be careful of is missing, because if you miss, you can curl the metal and it will separate a little bit from the lock bar. I've done it a tiny bit there. Won't be super visible in the end product. Okay, so far so good. Next thing, we need to get the metal cutter and cut our blade shape into here, and then we're going to get the micarta, drill this hole in it, and cut out some pieces of micarta and laminate them to the sides. Okay, I've got the blade actually clamped to a piece of wood in the vise, which ought to be a bit safer. And it's very helpful if you can see where the actual tip of the knife is, so I'd recommend you take your other knife, which I'm sure you have on you, and cut away the tape, and then fold this part a bit so you can see and identify, okay, that's the ultimate tip of the knife. If you're not sure in your metal cutting abilities, you might want to put a piece of masking tape over this and then pencil mark where you want to go. I know I'm going to go straight from the end of that nail nick out to the tip. So I think I'm going to try it just freehand. This cuts metal very fast. You want to start with your approach kind of slower. Now this is going to be made a bit more complicated by the fact that we've got a slip joint knife here. And so I'm not sure how exactly I'm going to approach this. Probably something like this. We'll see how it goes. Okay, we're going on to overlay the handles. Now this is a sheet of linen micarta, which I picked up from an industrial supplier. It's only 1 millimeter thick. Today we're sort of building more of a hyper slicer, and so we're going really, really thin. This is my tip with micarta. With micarta, don't go to a knife shop to get it. Go to an industrial plastic supplier. They use huge quantities of this stuff, and half the time they'll be willing to cut you a little sheet of it. This sheet cost me 10 New Zealand dollars. That's about $6, and it's gonna last me for probably 20 knives. And so that's very, very, very low cost. As long as you're not picky about color, industrial plastic supplier is the place to go for micarta. Now make sure that you actually leave a little bit of extra space on the micarta, because you'll grind away the last bit with a flap disc grinder, and you don't want it to be too unforgiving. So I have overlaid, I've put some tape on this piece of micarta, and I'm going to just give a real generous line to my actual final grind lines. So we have lots of room to adjust and room for error. You want to first make your cuts that are not going to sacrifice the structures that are holding it in place. So I'm going to start over here. Now we've got a couple of sort of blob amoeba-like handle scales, way too big. But I want to encourage you, like, I'm a bit OCD, and so I really have a hard time leaving myself this much room. But I recommend that you do it, because you can always quickly grind away excess materials off of a material like this. But you cannot use something that you leave too small. So we need to mark where those pivots fall so that we can drill them out. And this is what I recommend doing, is just getting a little bit of paint on the pivot of your knife here, and then lining it up to where you've got plenty of space on every side, giving it a little dot just like that. Same thing on the other side, or actually you can line these up and drill them at the same time. Now I highly recommend that you drill materials like micarta that are pretty hard plastics. Drill through into a piece of wood, because otherwise you might chip out the other side. You want to find a drill bit that matches the size of your pivot. Just a little bit larger is ideal. Okay, so got it drilled. It fits just pretty well around the pivot hardware there, which is good. And the next step is just to epoxy this thing in place. I know it looks kind of silly and amoebic at this point, But trust me, we're gonna get there. We're gonna have an attractive slicer at the end of this, I promise. So, I recommend using some tough 2-part epoxy. Make sure you get a good, strong bond. You'll want to slot your pivot screw through the hole. Make sure you're lined up everywhere. Make sure that the micarta goes out beyond the edge of the steel and that you're centered to your pivot. As long as you keep those two things in check throughout the clamping process, you ought to do all right. Clamp it down real good and hard. Make sure you don't squish your steel liners though. That's a bit of a risk. You might have to adjust it before you're really ready to leave it. Alright guys, we're going to have to leave that to dry for a while. Next episode we're going to come back, we're going to sand, grind it down to shape, sand it down to a nice polish, and then we'll have a final product to look at. Thanks for tuning in this week. For now, I'll just say peace out from the home slice. And remember that your DIY, it doesn't have to be perfect. Part of the point of this video is that you can do stuff that ends up cool, even if you run into problems like I'm running into in this episode, and it's throwing you a curveball. So hopefully we'll get a really cool product in the end. Stay tuned until next time. Thanks.